She had one shot at this. One dinner. One man. One chance to be so thoroughly, magnificently repulsive that the most dangerous information broker in Seoul would look across the table, feel his stomach turn, and quietly let her walk free. Jamila Osei had painted monsters for a living. She had sculpted wounds that made grown film directors flinch, built faces from nothing but latex and silicone and sheer obsessive skill. Tonight, she turned that genius on herself. The unibrow alone had taken 45 minutes. She stepped back from the mirror in the restaurant bathroom, assessed her work with the cold precision of a woman who knew exactly what she'd done, and felt something she hadn't expected. Pride. Then she picked up the garlic and onion bagel she'd brought in her purse, because details mattered, took one enormous, aggressive bite, and walked out to meet her future husband. She had no idea he'd been waiting for her for 6 months. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell right now, because this story, you are not going to want to miss a single second of what happens next. The maitre d' moved through the restaurant ahead of her with the careful dignity of a man carrying a live grenade through a library. Around them, the room held its breath. Table 9 was behind a silk screen partition. The private one, the one that didn't exist on any public floor plan. The man already sitting in it did not look up immediately. He was scrolling his phone with the unhurried authority of someone who had long since stopped performing attentiveness for anyone. Bespoke charcoal suit, white shirt, collar buttoned with military precision, no tie, no jewelry, nothing unnecessary. He was, in the most inconvenient possible way, devastating. Jamila sat down and took a loud, full-commitment bite of the garlic bagel. The sound bounced off the walls. He looked up. His dark eyes moved across her face, the unibrow, the neon green, the mustard, the hairy latex mole placed at the exact angle calculated for maximum visual distress. He took in every detail of the masterclass-level disaster she'd constructed. He said nothing. Jamila chewed louder. She held his gaze and dared him, the silent, full-bodied dare of a woman who had rehearsed this moment, to do anything other than excuse himself and call his lawyers before the breadbasket arrived. He reached into his breast pocket. She expected a phone, an exit strategy, something. He produced a linen napkin. He leaned across the table with the composed, deliberate movement of a man who had already decided how this was going to end, pressed his thumb to the latex mole on her cheek, and peeled it off in one clean, precise motion. He set it on the edge of the table like a chess piece removed from the board. Then he leaned in, close enough that she heard the absolute quiet certainty in his voice. "You missed a spot." He sat back, slid a document folder across the tablecloth with 2 fingers. "The papers are already drawn. We wed on Friday. My legal team will contact yours before midnight." He went back to his phone. Jamila stared at the mole, at the folder, at the man responding to messages as if he hadn't just dismantled 6 weeks of planning with 1 thumb and 12 words. She took another bite of the bagel. He didn't blink. This, she thought, with the dawning horror of someone whose trap just fired the wrong direction, is a problem. She thought she had him completely figured out. She was so wrong it would take her 3 weeks, a locked vault, and a Seoul rooftop in winter to understand exactly how wrong. 6 months before the worst dinner of her life, Jamila Osei was exactly where she belonged. Elbow deep in a silicone mold. Arguing quietly with herself about a demon's eyebrow. She was freelance, had been for 3 years, since the morning she'd walked out of the agency that kept forgetting to put her name on the work she'd built from scratch. The creature designs, the full-face transformations, the prosthetics that made directors go still in their chairs. She'd left with her kit and her portfolio, and the unshakable certainty of a woman who knows the difference between a door closing and a door being closed on purpose. Her work was extraordinary. She knew it the way she knew her own eye color. She was also, as of that month, 3 paychecks behind on rent. Not because the work wasn't coming, because the work kept getting taken. By a stepfamily who treated her income as a shared resource and called it love. She was composing in her head the 14th version of a boundary-setting conversation she was never going to have when the backstage door slammed open and a man came through it moving completely wrong for the space, not panicked, controlled. But underneath the control, the precise, practiced awareness of someone who had spent years making certain no one could get behind him. He was also, and this was the professional problem, impossible to disguise without help. Sharp jaw, dark eyes cataloging the room in fast, systematic sweeps. A face so architecturally specific, it had zero chance of disappearing into a crowd of theater technicians. Whoever was looking for him was coming through that door in 30 seconds. She'd processed all of this before he'd seen her. "Sit," she said, already moving toward her kit. He stopped, found her across the room. She got the full, unfiltered force of his attention, the kind that arrived like a hand against the chest, and for exactly 1 second, something in her went very still. She kept moving. I don't care what you don't. Service entrance, expensive suit, torn seam, someone coming. Sit." He sat. She worked fast. Base coat, contouring, glasses from the character rack. He held completely still in the chair, which almost no one did. The work felt strange to most people. He sat like a man who had made a full, immediate decision to trust the process and was executing it with his entire body. Smart. Something in her noted. He surrenders to the thing that's going to save him. "Don't smile," she murmured, working near his jaw. "It'll crack before it sets." "I wasn't going to smile." "Good. You don't look like the type." The backstage door opened. 2 men in dark clothing conducted a fast, efficient search. Jamila shifted her angle casually, blocking the sightline to her chair, and talked loudly to no one about eyebrow geometry, the way backstage technicians talked. Constantly, to the air, because that was just how they existed in the world. The 2 men found nothing, moved on. "Why did you help me?" he asked, into the changed silence after. She stepped back, assessed the work, felt the small, clean satisfaction of something done correctly under pressure. Handed him a compact mirror. He looked at his transformed face. Something moved behind his eyes, deeper than surprise, nothing to do with the technical quality of the transformation. "Because you needed it," she said. "And I was here." Exit behind the curtain rack. East side. She went back to the demon eyebrow. She didn't see him stop at the curtain. Didn't see his eyes move back to her one last time. Didn't see him stand on the east side of the building in the cold soul night and make a decision that settled somewhere below the level of thought. He was going to find out exactly who she was. She would find out 6 months later at a restaurant table with a bagel she'd brought from home and a plan that had never once had a chance. Here's what she didn't know about men who built empires in the shadows. They didn't become untouchable by reacting. They became untouchable by already knowing what was coming. 3 days into her residency at his glass and steel fortress, Jamila received a dress. The card read, "Gala, Thursday, 8 p.m. Appropriate dress enclosed." The word appropriate was doing a lot of unpleasant work. The dress was technically a dress the way a parking citation is technically paperwork. Indeterminate beige, 2 sizes too large, hemline uneven, zipper pre-compromised in a way designed to announce itself at the worst possible moment. It was a message wearing the costume of a gift. She stood holding it and breathed through her nose for a count of 8. A technique developed over years of watching her stepfamily lift her checks off the table and call it borrowing. Then put it back in the box, and went to find something from her own wardrobe. She was in the corridor when she heard it. Seo Yoon's voice through the study door, low and precise. "Where is it from?" No question mark. A coordinate. Min Jae's voice, a half-beat too smooth. "The stylist sourced it." "I didn't authorize a stylist. Try again." Silence. Then, quieter. The register she was already learning was the most significant one. "Whatever arrives in this house with her name on it passes through you. Correct it. You have until morning." She moved back to her room before the footsteps reached the door. He'd caught it. Before she said a word. Before she'd even confirmed it was intentional. He'd been tracking the specific texture of what arrived in his house addressed to her, and he'd moved on it privately, without staging a protection she'd have to publicly receive and thank him for in front of the person who'd tried to humiliate her. That was the part she couldn't file away somewhere convenient. She went to the gala in her own deep emerald dress, the one she'd brought for a production shoot. The green, that did extraordinary things against deep brown skin. She arrived on Seo-yoon's arm. Invisible turned out not to be an option. He moved through the room with unhurried ownership that didn't announce itself. He introduced her to people by name only, no qualifier, no footnote. The way you introduced someone whose presence required zero justification. His hand at the small of her back pulled her into every circle he entered as if leaving her. Outside one was a geometry he hadn't considered. Then Min-jae materialized at her elbow during the one window when Seo-yoon stepped toward the bar. "You'd honestly be doing him a kindness?" Min-jae said, warm and reasonable. "To step aside." "To what?" said Seo-yoon. He was standing 2 feet behind Min-jae's shoulder with a glass of water he'd brought for her, his expression communicating, with extreme economy, that he had heard enough of this particular sentence. He stepped past Min-jae as if the man had become architectural, put the glass in Jamila's hand, and said, "There's someone I want you to meet." He didn't look back. Min-jae watched them walk away. His smile stayed exactly where it was. His eyes did something else. Something that had been living in the space between devotion and damage for 7 years. She made one critical error. She decided she already knew who the villain was. 3 weeks in, on a Tuesday evening, Jamila went to the lower level looking for a reference book Seo-yoon had mentioned during one of their evenings, the ones that kept running past 11 o'clock without either of them acknowledging the extension. She was in the archive corridor when she heard Min-jae's voice through a door left insufficiently closed. She heard Aisha's name. She stopped. "Thursday. He'll be in the East Wing until at least 10. I can move her through the North Gate if the camera rotation is adjusted." A pause. Her stepsister's voice, tinny and distant on the phone. "The contract documentation confirms it. His name, not hers. The substitution was unauthorized." Another pause. Then Min-jae's voice dropping entirely out of its professional register into something underneath that had nothing to do with contracts. "He's been distracted. In a way I have not seen in 7 years, and that is precisely why it needs to end." The word distracted landed differently than everything before it. It landed with the specific ache of a man watching the person. He loves look at someone else, saying it the way you say a word that costs you something every single time. Jamila stood very still in the corridor and reassembled everything. Aisha hadn't built this. Aisha was reactive, vain, genuinely convinced she deserved whatever Jamila had, but she didn't have access to camera rotation schedules. She didn't know which wings were occupied at which hours. She had no idea where the archival vault was, let alone how to lock it from outside. Min-jae had given her all of it, not because he wanted Seo-yoon to have a different wife, because he wanted the world to go back to the version where Seo-yoon's entire field of attention was organized around the one person who had maintained it for 7 years, and had built his whole life around a man who had never once looked at him as anything other than indispensable. That was the truth. It was devastating, and it was happening on Thursday. Thursday morning, her phone stopped working. Full battery. Full signal. Every call failed before it connected. Every message stacked unsent. The landline went to voicemail. Ms. Park had, for the first time in 3 weeks, taken a personal day. The estate had been cleared around her. She just hadn't been told. She was moving toward the East Wing, toward Seo-yoon's meeting, because the math said now. When Min-jae stepped out of a side corridor directly into her path. Perfectly composed. Already positioned. Already there. "He asked me to check on you. Long meeting. He mentioned you'd been wanting to look at the reference collection. I can give you access now if you like." She looked at the offer. its seamless construction, the way it had no visible edges. She thought about the word distracted, and the weight it had been carrying for 7 years. "I don't think I'll go to the vault today," she said carefully, "but thank you." She turned toward the main corridor. She heard him move behind her. She didn't make it. The vault sealed behind her. The cold arrived immediately, consistent. The temperature of a space built to protect irreplaceable paper from the variables of human presence, which meant it was indifferent to people entirely. Jamila stood in the blue light and breathed. Facts first. Fact: her communication had been severed before she'd entered the corridor. This had been running longer than she'd realized. Fact: Aisha was upstairs, moving toward Seoyun with arguments she'd been given by someone who knew exactly which ones would land. Fact: no internal release. 3 hours until the gala ended. 3 hours was too long to stay cold. She looked at the climate control unit on the far wall. She stood up. She didn't have her kit. She had a lip balm, a utility tool on her keyring, and a handful of 1 coins. But she'd spent a decade working in climate-controlled spaces, and she knew that archival HVAC systems had emergency ventilation protocols, triggered by manual switches building codes required to be accessible. From inside the controlled space, 11 minutes, behind the second shelving unit, a small access panel painted over once. She found the switch. It wasn't freedom. It wouldn't open the door, restore her signal, or stop what was happening upstairs. What it would do was trigger a maintenance alert on the building management system, which would ping the facilities panel, which was in the security office, which required a physical presence to cancel. She flipped it. She sat back down on the cold floor and waited. She pressed her thumb into her palm and breathed. He built his empire on information. He caught the dress before you said a word. He heard Minjai at the gala and responded before you had to ask. He always knows. She said it the way you said something when you needed it to be load-bearing. He always knows. 40 floors above her, the gala continued. A woman in a deliberate dress was moving toward a man she had no claim on, carrying every argument she'd been handed. And Jamila sat in the blue cold and waited to find out if the prayer held. Here's what almost no one understood about Seo Yun Kwan. His stillness wasn't absence. It was everything, running underneath a surface calibrated to show nothing. The maintenance alert came through on his watch at 9:42 p.m. Environmental irregularity. Archival Vault B. Manual ventilation override. Manual. He set down the glass he hadn't touched. "Excuse me," he said to the man from Busan. Politely, finally. He found Minjai in the security office already moving to cancel the alert. Already there. Already anticipating. Already trying to close the signal before it escalated. 7 years. Seo-yun looked at the man who had built his operational infrastructure from nothing, who had been present for every professional victory and every 3 a.m. crisis, and understood, with the clean, terrible clarity of reading a file he'd been carrying without opening, that he had known. Not the specifics, the shape, the particular quality of Minjae's attention since Jamila arrived. The micro-calibrations of a loyalty that had curdled into something else. He'd given it the benefit of the doubt it hadn't deserved, because 7 years meant something to him. Because he was, beneath all of it, a man who needed the things he built to mean something. "Where is she?" he said. "Not what have you done? Not how could you? Just, where?" Minjai's face went through the decision, in real time, whether to keep performing or stop. He stopped. He set the key card on the panel. Vault B, sub-level 2. The silence between them restructured things permanently. Final. The way certain doors were final. They closed completely, and nothing on the other side of them changed what was now true. "She's cold," Minjai said, voice stripped to something raw and ashamed and too late. "She's been in there 40 minutes. The temperature..." But Seo-yun was already gone. He placed his palm on the vault reader, red to green. The door opened with the pressurized exhale of a space that had been holding its contents against the world. She was shivering. Barely. She'd been managing it, controlling the physical expression of it, the way she controlled everything. But in the even archival light, he could see it in the small contractions she couldn't fully suppress. The discoloration of her lips. The held tension across her shoulders that wasn't her natural posture. He crossed the vault in 4 steps. His suit jacket, the bespoke charcoal one, carrying a full evening's warmth, came off in one motion and went around her shoulders. He dropped to one knee in front of her, putting himself level with her face. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her across the restaurant table. The same quality of total, undefended attention. The wall not lowered. Absent. As if it had never existed in this room. Are you hurt? No. Are you certain? I'm a makeup artist, Seo-yun, not a doctor. Yes, I'm certain. I'm just... The exhaled breath shook at the end of it. Cold. He sat beside her on the floor and pulled her against his side and pressed his palm against her arm, generating heat, slow and steady. Not narrating it, not naming it. Just physics. 2 bodies in a cold room, one doing what it could for the other. She went rigid for exactly 3 seconds. Then she went still in a different way. The kind that wasn't resistance but arrival. A person settling into something they've been holding themselves away from until the holding itself became exhausting. Her head came to rest on his shoulder. It was Min-jae, she said eventually, into the space between them. I know. He let Aisha in. I know. A beat. Did you know before tonight? The honest kind of quiet. I knew the shape of it, he said. I didn't act because I owed him the specifics. I should have been faster. She considered this. He's in love with you, she said. Not an accusation. An SFX artist reading a face she'd been studying for weeks, finally saying what she'd seen. He went quiet in a different register. I know that too, he said. Very low. Something real and heavy in it. That's a lot to carry, she said. And she meant it entirely, and he could hear that she did. And something in his chest shifted that had nothing to do with temperature. They sat in the blue archival light, while 40 floors above them Seoul continued its indifferent brilliance. And eventually, the shivering stopped entirely. He didn't execute it loudly. 3 calls before 7 a.m., 2 emails, 11 minutes with his legal team. By 9, Min-jae's credentials were revoked from every system he'd touched in 7 years. By 10, his name had been quietly, surgically removed from every network where it had carried weight because it reflected Seo-yun's. Not a dramatic exile, a precise one. The kind that didn't create a martyr, just permanently closed every door that had been open because of an association that was now over. Min-jae received 2 lines. Your severance has been processed. Do not contact this office again. The Step family arrived at 11. Without announcement, with the full confidence of people who had never once experienced an unwelcome arrival. They were stopped at the gate by a legal representative already waiting, document folder in hand, with the entirely unbothered energy of someone for whom this was a routine Thursday morning. Every figure, every calculation, every deferred payment that had been leverage over Jamila's life, notice of immediate full collection, no window, no terms, no negotiation. Jamila didn't watch. She was in her room working, a prosthetic she'd been designing in her head for 3 weeks, when Seo-yun knocked and came in and stood in her doorway looking at the portable lamp, the work in progress, the organized landscape of her space, with the expression she only caught when he wasn't entirely sure she was watching. It's done, he said. I heard the intercom. Fully done. The debt is called. Their property transfers to cover it. Documentation filed. Also, something almost careful in the register, which on him was entirely disarming. The stepsister was wearing 2 pieces last night, lifted directly from your portfolio photographs. My legal team has added an IP claim to the collection notice. Jamila looked at him. How did you know about my portfolio photographs? Because I've been paying attention, he said. Simply. Completely. She studied his face for a long moment. He let her, which was its own kind of statement. Seo Yun. Why did you actually sign that contract at the restaurant? The real reason. The question took up the whole room. He stepped inside, stopped at her work table, picked up the prosthetic she was building, correctly, supporting it the way she would, and turned it in the lamplight. 6 months ago, he said, a woman in a theater backstage assessed a man in trouble in 4 seconds and helped him without asking why, without asking what it was worth, without asking for anything. She talked about eyebrow geometry while people looking for him walked past, and when she was done, she handed him a mirror and went back to her work. He set the piece down. He looked at her. I have spent a decade in rooms full of people who want something from me. I can read what someone wants before they've finished sitting down. It is the most exhausting thing I know how to do. He paused. You wanted nothing. You saw a problem, you solved it, and you let me leave. And I could not find another version of that person anywhere in my life. The lamp hummed between them. So yes, I signed the contract. I would have signed anything that put me in a room with you again. I want to show you something. He led her to the third door on the left and pressed his palm to the reader. The light inside came up warm, adjustable, full spectrum. The specific color temperature serious SFX artists, specified in build-outs and rarely received because the per-fixture cost made producers grieve quietly. Jamila's feet stopped. Independent ventilation in the ceiling. She could see it. Ductwork separated from the main estate system because fumes and heat needed their own management and someone had understood that. Temperature-controlled storage along the east wall. Adjustable workstation centered in the space. Stocked, not with a general supply run, but with a specific researched acquisition. The materials of her actual discipline, selected by someone who had understood the difference. There was a document folder on the workstation. When? She said. 3 months ago. She turned around. He was in the doorway, with an expression she hadn't seen before. Open in a way that was almost uncomfortable to look at directly, the way certain light sources were. The man who had built an empire on other people's pressure points, standing in a doorway with something that had no strategic value whatsoever. Open the folder, he said. The document was dated 7 months ago. Before the restaurant, before the arrangement, before any of it, an international film production contract. The company she'd had circled in her own notes for 2 years as the contract that would change the shape of her life. Her name on it, the production company's signature already present, waiting only for hers. Your portfolio was submitted anonymously under a pseudonym you use online, he said. I didn't alter the work. I put it on the correct desk. You should have told me. Yes. Immediately, no deflection. I was afraid you'd connect it to the arrangement and it would feel like a transaction. It was never... He stopped. Started again. The arrangement was a mechanism. The mechanism existed because I needed a reason to be in the same room as you, and I didn't have one, and I built one. The purpose was what, exactly? She said. He held her gaze. You, he said, entirely plainly, no armor, around it. The purpose was you, Jamila. She needed air. The rooftop was cold and enormous, and she stood at the railing and looked at Seoul and thought about the woman who had walked into a restaurant 3 weeks ago with a bagel and a mole, and a desperate, clever plan built on the conviction that she needed to protect herself from exactly this. From being chosen. Fully. By someone with the capacity and intention to actually do something about it. She heard the rooftop door. He stood a few feet back, never crowding, never, and looked at the city. I don't know how to do this, she said, because she was a direct person when she wasn't running. I know how to survive things. I know how to protect my work and hold the line on what people can take. I am genuinely excellent at all of that. I know, he said. I don't know how to receive things. Let things be given. I keep looking for the cost. There isn't one. There's always one. Not this time. He closed the distance slowly. Deliberately, visibly, the way he always moved around her. Nothing hidden in the approach. He stopped close enough that the cold air between them had narrowed to almost nothing. I've spent a career pricing things, determining what leverage costs, what silence buys. This, he looked at her face, the real one, the one that had been there under everything from the beginning. Doesn't fit any of my frameworks. I've stopped trying to make it. Because it's not a transaction, she said. Because you're not anything I can quantify. And I've stopped needing to. She looked at him for a long moment. Soul hummed 40 floors below. Their exhaled breath made small matching clouds in the cold air. She reached into her coat pocket. A spare latex mole. She'd carried it since the restaurant. Professional habit. She always had backups. She'd never once cleaned out her coat. She held it up between them. His eyes went to it, then to her face. And then, for the first time, without performing it or calculating it or letting it escape by accident. Seo Yun-kwan smiled. Not the ghost of amusement she'd caught twice before. A real one, the kind that rearranged his face entirely, made him look his age, made him look reachable. She pressed the mole onto his cheek. He let her. She stepped back, assessed with the professional eye she'd been born with, tilted her head, nodded once. Perfect. Obviously, he said, warmth still in his voice. I have an excellent artist. She laughed, the surprised kind before the decision to laugh could get involved, and it scattered into the soul skyline, and he watched it happen with the expression of a man who has just understood that this specific sound is the thing he is going to spend the rest of his life trying to cause. He reached out, took the lapel of her coat in his hand, just the fabric, an anchor rather than a hold, and drew her the remaining distance. Jamila. Looking at his face, at the mole. Stop analyzing and let me kiss you. I'm not analyzing. You are absolutely analyzing. I'm observing. He closed the last inch. It wasn't dramatic. No swell, no staging. Quiet and warm and certain. The certainty of two people who had already done all the deciding before their lips met. It lasted long enough that Soul continued without them, and somewhere in the estate below, Ms. Park saw the rooftop lights still on and allowed herself the smallest, most private smile before she went to bed. When they broke apart, his hand had moved from her lapel to the curve of her jaw. They were both breathing differently. She looked at his face. The mole was perfectly placed. Good adhesive, she said. He pressed his forehead to hers, and the real laugh, low, private, surprised out of him, hit the night air. It took 60 days for Seo Yun-kwan to begin the formal transition of his shadow brokerage into a legitimate corporate intelligence firm, a decision his legal team received in stunned silence before recovering their professionalism. His people assumed it was strategic, preemptive repositioning. It wasn't. It was a man who had sat on a cold vault floor and understood, with the slow, sustained clarity of finally reading something he'd been avoiding, that he'd been living in a structure built to hold power rather than people. And that power and people required entirely different architecture. You didn't have to do that, she said when he told her. I know. I wasn't a condition. I know. I changed it because it was past time. You didn't ask me to. You just... A pause with something almost tender in it. Reminded me that different light was available. She thought about the reference book she'd been going to find the night of the vault. The small, ordinary reason she'd been in the wrong corridor at exactly the right moment. The latex mole in her coat pocket that had ended up on his cheek on a rooftop. The way enormous things assembled themselves. From small, stubborn choices made without knowing their weight. The Tokyo contract, she said. Already transmitted. Meeting in 3 weeks. I would like to accompany you, if that's... Yes, she said. He stopped. That was faster than I was anticipating. I'm practicing, she said. Accepting things. You said there's no cost. There isn't. Then yes. Come to Tokyo. And that's the thing about Jamila Osei. She walked into that restaurant with a latex mole and a garlic bagel, and 6 weeks of meticulous planning. And the most dangerous man in Seoul looked at all of it, looked at her underneath all of it, and chose her anyway. Not the disguise, not the arrangement, her. The woman who built monsters for a living and had never once let anyone see that underneath all that brilliant protective armor, she just wanted a life big enough to hold everything she actually was. He saw it in a backstage corridor 6 months before she sat down across from him. He built a room for it before she knew he was looking. And she, the woman who could disguise any face on earth, never once thought to check whether her own was showing. Elt familiar today? If something in the way he paid attention felt like something you've been quietly waiting to believe was possible, you are exactly who this channel was built for. Subscribe, right now, before the algorithm takes you somewhere else, because next week, we're back. With a woman who speaks 6 languages and pretends she only speaks 1, and a man who has been answering her in all 6 of them, from the very beginning. I'll see you there.